Good job, Shine Labs. I think there's great momentum. Last year, 7 or 8 events. Some of them were phenomenal. So, really looking forward to 2018, and I think it's a nice way to start the year with having Dilip here, right? So keep up the great work, guys. So Dilip, really excited to have you here.
Thank you.
I think before we jump into some of the questions, it'll be nice if you can share your story, right, from your early days to your current endeavors. So a few minutes, I think that'll it'll open you up to the audience and it'll set the stage for a nice conversation.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I face everybody here. Hi guys and hi ladies. I came to Stanford back in '68 of the last century and got my master's and started working here in the Valley. And initially I worked at a company called Stanford Research Institute, which does independent research. I worked there for about 10 years. Then I worked for a company called Kaiser Electronics. And I worked there for 10 years, and the interesting that happened was the vesting period then was 10 years, and I ran a large R&D facility at that company. And 2 months before my vesting period, I was laid off. My entire lab was closed, and that was my first wake-up call when I was 49 years old. And at that point, I said to myself, I could probably find a job as head of engineering somewhere, but what would I do if I got laid off at 59 or 69 or 79? And I did not have an answer. So what I decided to do at the time is to see if I could reinvent myself in some way and figure out how to go in a new direction. And so at that time, AIDS was a very big thing. This is 89, circa 89 or so. And I attended a speech given by the president of a company called Becton Dickinson, which is in San Jose. And he made a speech and he said that we are the first ones to develop a desktop instrument for detecting progression of AIDS. And we expect to have this commercially available in 6 years. And I said, gosh, in high tech, we're used to doing things in 12 months or 18 months, right? So not knowing what I didn't know, I just walked with him through the hallway and say, why does it take 6 years to do this? And he said, oh, no, this is research and clinical trials and FDA approval and all of that stuff. So I said to him, not knowing anything about it, I said, what if I showed you how to do it in 3 years? And he said, how can you do that? I said, well, I can show you how we can do that in 2 years because we do that in high tech all the time. This is a biotech company called Becton Dickinson. So he said, why don't you come tomorrow and give us a presentation how you would do it? So not knowing anything about it, I went the next day, made a presentation, and he said, let's get started. And that was it. So that's when I decided that a lot of the times, and that was my first reinvention going into biotech from high tech. And we were able to get that out in 3 years, by the way. And that instrument is now commercially available. This was in 1992. So what has happened over the years, I don't want to give my whole life story here. So I have encountered this about 4 times. I've been either laid off or things changed radically that I had to change directions. So once I figured out it's not that hard to change directions, I've changed that 5 times. This is my 5th career. My second change of direction was when I became a marketing consultant for a consulting company and did research, marketing research, and did something very novel with how to do what I call customer discovery rather than doing surveys. Did that for about 5 or 6 years and with companies called Hewlett Packard and Motorola and many other companies. Then I became a leadership coach back in the late 90s. And then when the valley turned down, 2001, the startup bubble burst and so forth, a lot of people were getting laid off, as you probably know, by the thousands. Hewlett Packard, Cisco, everybody else was laying off. So at that time, I was also laid off, being a leadership coach at the time. So I decided, what a great chance to become a career coach, because by then I had already reinvented 4 times. And all these people who were coming out were engineers like I was at the time. And I said, what if I showed you, and I called a company called Lee Hecht Harrison. They do transitional coaching for people who are laid off. And I called the head of coaching and said, whom do you have that understands how to reinvent, especially engineers? And whom do you have that understands how to create a message that puts them in a new area of work? And her next question was, are you available? She didn't even ask me, have you coached before? She didn't ask me, am I certified? And so forth. So the point I want to make is, a lot of the times we defeat ourselves by how we position ourselves. For example, when I call Lee Hecht Harrison, instead of saying, whom do you have that understands how to reinvent and so forth, most people would say, I just lost my job. I work hard and I learn fast, and I need to find a job because I can't pay my mortgage. Do you have a job available? That's the typical call somebody makes. Now, I could have made that call, and guess what the answer would have been? Send us your resume and we'll look into it. That's the typical answer. But the way I positioned it left her no doubt that I knew what I was talking about. And I really didn't, except the fact that I had done this before. And the same thing that happened with Becton Dickinson, for example. So what my big learning from these 5 reinventions that I have done, and this is what I basically coach in my coaching practice, is don't let your limiting beliefs stand in the way of what you really want to do. And don't do linearly what you did before as the next step in your career, because there are always new avenues open that we need to be open to. So that's my story. I mean, it's a long one, but I've used that to kind of codify it in a way that allows me to create a process where I can help people show how to reinvent. So that's my whole practice actually now.
Well, much appreciated. Now, this is a networking event, and this question may be sort of singing to the choir, but it will help, the organizers and, folks to grow, Shine Lab, etc., right? So the question on networking is, why is networking important, and how do you build a stellar network in Silicon Valley?
I think that's a good question. A lot of the times, and you will probably find this to be true in how you pursue your job, they come through somebody who knows you, and you will also find that when senior executives move out or let go or whatever, that happens a lot, especially in the Valley. When they go to the next place, they don't just hire somebody from the street. They know whom they have worked with, they know whom they trust, they know whom they can rely on, and they say, are you available? So a lot of the times, they will carry with them the people that they believe would help them grow in their new company. And that's what networking is all about. So there are 2 aspects of networking. One is, once you are established as a manager, director, executive, and so forth, you need to develop your own network of people whom you rely on, whom you trust, and who can help you grow and develop yourself, because that's the ecosystem you create. And the other thing is, as you come out of college, or as you're growing in your career, starting, say, in the first phase of your career, and the first phase of a career for me is between the age of 25 to 35. That's the first phase of your career. You need to spend time doing 2 things. In addition to being really good at what you do technically, which is a requirement. But in additionally, the 2 things I always tell my clients to do is, 1, build good relationships with people within your ecosystem, and not just networking. I'm talking about relationships where you are a trusting partner to them in some way. You team with them and they understand how you work. And the second part of it is build networks. Build your own networks, such as using LinkedIn and some of the other avenues, and actually not just create this, what I call cyber networks, but actually interact with them, participate, contribute, and use those networks, and I don't mean to use in a mercenary way, use those networks to help your network as well as help yourself. And the best way to do that in the cyberspace is to, you read somebody's blog, comment on it. because LinkedIn rates on how many times not only you come to the platform, but how many times you comment on something, how many times you present yourself in LinkedIn. So I write blog every week. So if you see my blog and if you like it, I'm not saying do it every time, make a comment, like the blog, make a comment. That way your presence in the network grows. And LinkedIn kind of ranks you based on how often you do certain things like this. So I'm saying two things. Number one, build relationships, which is separate from building networks. And use the networks to kind of plug yourself into what works for you, such as reading things, liking things, commenting on things, or even forwarding things to other people. Takes just literally a click, but it increases your footprint each time you do it. So keep doing these things. Not just passively ask somebody to say, you know, I want to be in your network, and then you go to somebody else. That's not building networks. That's like collecting business cards. Doesn't do anything for you. Is that your question?
Great tips. That was great. I think next question is I think good segue to the next question is, building, that credibility, building your own brand, right? What tips can you do to, for people to do that?
Okay. So here is the thing, once again, and I've written a lot of blogs about it, that you need to start building your brand right from the get-go. In other words, you need to identify what brand presence you want to create in your profession. And you need to be very disciplined about it. In other words, all my blogs are about careers. I don't write blogs about anything else, like finance or parenting or anything like that, although I could if I wanted to. But my focus is strictly on career matters. And I write everything about careers. I've written almost 200 blogs on LinkedIn now, I think 180 something. And each is different about some topic on career. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to keep being the go-to person in that space. So whenever somebody says, I want to know about blockchain, for example, or big data or analytics or predictive analytics or whatever topic that you decide that is your focus, you need to be so good at what you do by constantly working at it that you become the go-to person in your community, in your group, in your company, in your profession. And you have to work at it. This just doesn't fall from the sky. And so part of developing the brand has to do with identifying what you do, how you do it, and getting constantly better at what you do. And the example I give is don't compare yourself with somebody like Bill Gates or anybody else. Compare that you are the benchmark. In other words, do something better you do today than you did yesterday. Because a lot of people come to me and I said, what do you want to be? And this is amazing, with as many clients as I work. What do you want to do? What do you want to be? And they say, well, my mother wants me to be a doctor, my father wants me to be an engineer, my neighbor said being a pilot is a good profession. You see what I'm saying? And so they have no idea what they want to do. They want to tell me what others want them to do. I said, no, that's why I have a fairly long questionnaire that delves into where your mind is at. And it's amazing, with as many people as I worked with, how many have that clarity. They want somebody to tell them what they should be doing. So develop your own clarity and develop the own brand around something that you believe in, that you will get good at. And initially, you will not be good at it. You will suck at it, actually. But by constantly keeping effort and focus and discipline, you will get good at it. This is how, you look at anybody, most people are very ordinary. Take a look at myself. I was probably in the lower middle of the class at IIT Bombay. And when I applied for Stanford, the guy who got the gold medal from my group, he laughed at me. He said, even I couldn't get into Stanford. I had to go to Rice. But I took a very different approach. My marks were not that good, my grades were not that great. But I wrote a very strong letter to the Dean of Admissions at Stanford as why I should be admitted to Stanford and what contributions I can make as a student. And that probably became the selling point. So it's not just your grades, or it's not just how intelligent you are. You could be quite average, as I have been, But you need to find that little edge that you can get to get what you want and figure out how to get it. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. I mean, let me tell you, that's how average I am. So you shouldn't hold your intelligence or IQ hostage to your goals. So coming back to the branding, the other side of the branding is brand is one thing you are, and brand is also something you are not. In other words, a brand should be what you want to be, and the brand should also be what you don't want to be. Like, I don't want to be a therapist. So I never write anything that suggests to people that I'm actually not just a career coach, but I'm also a therapist. That's something that I avoid saying in my blogs or saying in my conversations with clients. And in fact, I differentiate myself from therapists because a lot of people don't know the difference between a therapist and a coach. So that's what branding is all about. Branding is having that clarity that when people think of you, they think of that brand, and vice versa. So I don't know if that answers the question. It's a tough road. There's no easy way to find, develop, and disseminate your brand. You have to work at it. It's a lot of hard work.
Just a follow-up question. While you were pursuing Stanford, what was your mindset? Was that I have to get into Stanford and no other?
No, not at all. I mean, I applied for 3 or 4. I applied for University of Michigan. I applied for Stanford. But Stanford at that time, and still probably is, was #1 university in electrical engineering at the time. This was back in 67, 68. And it had a big name, so I said, what do I have to lose? I'll just apply, but apply it with all my powers that I could marshal to get what I wanted, and I got in. So maybe it's luck, maybe it's partially something else, but the message I want to give you is don't be deterred by people who tell you you're not good enough. Like this gold medalist told me, gosh, I couldn't even get in. How could you get in? You didn't even make in the first 10%. I said, well, let me try and find out. Because there are a lot of people who will dissuade you from doing what you want to do. And if you listen to them, then you suffer the fate of mediocrity. So don't do that to yourself.
Very true. We have quite a few folks in college here. For someone in college, right, and they are thinking, how do I break $1 million in 5 years, right? So what kind of skills should they be wanting to acquire?
Okay, so don't start with that objective because that, and just, I had forgotten that I had defined success that way, but that's the definition of success. A lot of the people here hold the belief that success is making $1 million in the first 2 years. I have a lot of clients who make $10 million a year, and they're absolutely miserable about their job, about their boss, about the company, about the life they lead. And so don't go by this illusory, shiny thing that is, millions of dollars in salary. What you want to do is, I think you want to find something that really engages you. Find something where you can make a difference. To me, that's what it's all about. If you can make a difference in somebody's life, you will make a difference in your life. But if you start with the premise that I want to make a difference in my life, I want to make a lot of money, I want to have a big house, or whatever it is, then somebody will come who is better than you at what you do and beat you up. So don't focus on the outcomes. Focus on what you want to be, the be versus have versus be, I call it. Everybody wants to have, get and have. And to me, it's about being and be what you want to be. So I do not say I do career coaching. I say I am a career coach. Do you see the difference? I do software versus saying I am software, if you want to call it that. And that's the difference between doing and being. What you are is your being, and if you can identify yourself with the being, then you are actually actualized at what you do. So money will come, but if you go after money, somebody will come who is better than you and blow you away. Happens every time. Most people don't realize that. So focus on being the best at what you are and beating yourself every day that you work at what you do. And then you will achieve and everything will then come. The fame will come, money will come, reputation will come, everything, and you'll be actually happy at what you do. I have so many clients who are absolutely miserable, although they make a lot of money, because they are not in their being, and consequently, it gets very tiresome very quickly, and that's not the life I believe in. Anyway, so.
Thank you for that. Now, you spoke a little bit about, challenges, in your career, or, I'm sure you overcome a fair amount of adversity. So how do you, deal with adversity and bounce back from it? Like for me personally, 2008 and 9 was probably the two most challenging years of my career with, the crisis that happened, right? So what advice would you give the audience on?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it has to do with resilience and belief in yourself. I've gone through a lot of adversities. I mean, I don't tell this openly, but at one point, I was actually homeless for a short while when I lost everything and I was jobless at the same time. But I did not let that defeat me or feel like I'm defeated just because these things happened to me. And so what you have to do is you have to see within yourself and see what can you really do, and deal with the adversity with your might, if you want to call it that, because this is how life is. I mean, you go through ups and downs in life, and things happen to you, and you have to kind of take it in stride, because nobody gives anything to you. You have to make it, but you can make it on your own. And so the lessons I've learned, and that's just one episode in my life, one chapter in my life, I've gone through a series of such defeats for a period of very long time, almost 14 years. And what I learned from it, who I became as a result of that, rather than surrendering yourself and saying, nothing is working for me for such a long time, I don't think it's meant to be for me. I never had that thought once, despite all the adversity I faced. And I mean, this is the other thing that happened, that 5 years ago, actually, 2012, October, I was declared dead. I actually came home and I died. I was dead for 5.5 minutes. And they thought that when they brought me back from being actually dead, not just a heart attack, but actual death. And they said that he's been dead too long. I think most of his organs are probably useless by now, especially brain and liver and other things. But I bounced back now. I didn't even know I was dead, and it happened. So, and I was in hospital for almost 47 days recovering from it, and I went through quadruple bypass after that. So I have encountered a lot of adversities in my life, but I never let that get in the way of who I am or what I can do with myself. So if you've gone through those kinds of episodes, you learn how to deal with adversity, and if I can do it, you can do it. It's not that. The thing is, people dwell on it, people feel sorry for themselves, and in the process they martyr themselves over it. Don't ever do that. Actually, it makes you more resilient, it makes you more robust, if you will, to deal with any adversity if you get past that and learn how to deal with it. People give up too quickly.
And any thoughts on being prepared for adversity, right? Like, for example, early in my career, my manager told me that, hey, always make sure you have at least 6 months savings, right? It takes a lot, especially for a lot of the youngsters, it takes a lot of pressure off if there's a job correction or whatever.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on being
No, absolutely. I mean, you need to have the 3 things that you need, right? And we need, first of all, you need a financial runway. You need a financial runway so that you are not immediately panicked. A lot of people who come to me after a job loss, the first question I ask them 2 questions. What is your financial runway and what's your emotional runway? Those are 2 different runways. And they say, I cannot pay my next month's mortgage. And that creates a severe sense of anxiety for them, because that's really very serious, because if they don't pay it for 3 months, they lose their home. The other part is the emotional runaway, where when you don't have a job and you don't have good prospects of getting a job or an interview, then you can't sleep at nights. And when you can't sleep at nights, you don't perform well during the interviews in the morning or the next day. So part of what you want to learn is to manage to have this runway. And if you cannot have this runway, at least have enough credit worthiness so you can live off a credit card for 3 or 4 or 5 months. That's not what I recommend. But in lieu of a savings plan, at least have a good credit rating to allow yourself some runway. Because that anxiety can show in an interview. And people can sense that no matter how much you try to fake it. It comes across, that anxiety comes across. And that can defeat you. People will say, why is he so anxious? Why does he want to close this interview? Even before fully knowing what we do here. And that will come across and that will defeat you. So try to manage that anxiety by doing things proactively so that you come across like you're not desperate for a job. Emotional runway is the other thing, which is where you need family support or support from those around you, and make sure that you openly tell them. I had one client, this is way back in 2002, I think it was, that she lost her job, and she was so terrified that she lost her job that she didn't tell her partner. I mean, they were sharing an apartment. And every day she would go out at 8 o'clock and come back at 5 o'clock as if she had a job. And then, I mean, she started really stressing out over it. And then her partner realized something was wrong. And then she came to know that she really hasn't had this job for 3 months, and that she was pretending like she's going to work. You see how stressful that is to kind of pretend? So don't ever do that to yourself. Tell your family, I lost my job. A lot of the people, especially from the culture where we come from, and some other cultures, it's a matter of shame to lose a job. It's not the case anymore. So don't let that shame get in the way of your disclosing to people who love you or who are around you. To tell them what happened, then they can support you. But if you don't have that support, it creates an additional element of stress. I don't know if that answers your question.
Very relevant, thank you for that. This is my favorite question, and this could apply either in a small team, a large organization, or for some of us who may be part of a non-profit or sitting on the board or something like that, right? How do you become a person of influence?
That's a good point. A person of influence comes from your ability to understand. I think the biggest underlying factor in that particular aspect of how do you increase your influence, and the other thing that people come to me for, a lot of people come to me for, is what they call executive presence. And what that is, to me, those are very similar things, or they are adjacent in terms of attributes that you need to develop. So let's talk about influence. Influence comes from your ability to understand how to deal and talk and communicate with the other person or persons so that you can shape their thinking in the way you want to shape it. I'll give you an example. A lot of the times, I do interview coaching. I show people how to do a good interview. And one of the questions I practice with my clients during this interview mock-up is to say, tell me your weaknesses. Because this is a question people struggle with. And what people will say is, I'm a perfectionist, so I never finish my project. I get angry when people don't complete their task that they committed on. And when I'm running out of budget on a project, I get very anxious. These are the I'm making it up here, right? The problem with answering the question this way is you're answering the way the question is asked. And most people don't realize you don't have to do that. You have to reframe the question because you are in the power to be able to do that. So my guidance to people is when somebody says, what are your weaknesses? My response is, or my coaching is, before I tell you my weaknesses, let me tell you what my strengths are. And I say my strengths are four. Number one, I plan a project, I know when to complete it and what contingencies I need to address. I form a team that's really a team that's committed to the project, that understands what is to be done, when to do it. Number three, I keep a clear channel of communication to the client, so when something goes off the rails, the client knows before anybody else does. And number four, I never surprise my boss. Those are the four things I do. Those are my strengths. Now, coming back to the question you asked me, I don't call them weaknesses, I call them areas on which I constantly work on. So you see, you completely diffuse the word weakness into a new frame of how to articulate what really works when you hire me. And so the two things I work on is how to communicate better. And the second thing is how to know when something is in trouble before it is in trouble. Those are the things that I constantly work on to learn how to be better at it. And over the years, I've really gotten good at it, but I'm very vigilant to keep it making better and better for me. So you see what happened here? The person asked you the question, what are your weaknesses? You started with your strengths, and he says, gosh, those are really good strengths. And then you didn't say those are my weaknesses, those are the things I work on. So you have the ability to reframe what is being presented to you so that the person gets the answer that you want to give it to them, and at the same time, it's a pretty compelling answer. And coming back to the influence, the same thing happens when you're arguing with somebody. The typical tendency of people is to challenge their beliefs. So when somebody says, my belief is that everybody should be in love with their company, everybody should be loyal to their company, that's my belief. And that's why I don't want to be taken off from this project and put on another project because the company will suffer. That's his point of view, because his belief is, I'm getting paid by the company, so I should be loyal to the company. That's his belief. So if you now say that's not a good belief to have, but I want you to do this other project, that person is going to resist it. But if you frame the answer to what you want him to do to influence him or her, to take on this new project, to say that, look, I'm glad to hear that you are loyal to the company, and I'm really glad to say that you believe in that. And what I'm asking you to do is actually in support of that belief, because this is a much more important project. This is a much bigger project. And if we complete it, it'll also elevate your ability to be visible to the higher-ups. We'll set you up for a promotion, and you'll be helping the company more than you're helping on this project. Will that work for you? You see the difference in how we pivoted this? So now this person is thinking, gosh, I'm loyal to the company, I love the company, and actually I'll be doing a bigger service by taking on this project, by leaving this half-done project where it is, and completing this one. So part of influencing and part of doing what you just said here has to do with shifting the frame in which you position your statements so that the other person can see the point of view from the view that they believe in. And that's a much easier way to influence than to keep arguing, oh, that's not a good belief, this company sucks, I want you to do this project. Then they dig their heels in. And it's happening in Washington today, right? The government is shut down. And that's the problem we have at all levels. And so this is how you build your influence. You build your influence by understanding the person's point of view, figuring out an argument that will sit well with that person's point of view, and articulating that and communicating that in a way that does not compromise who you are, but that allows that person to say, gosh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. One of the best arguments I saw was when this proposition, I forget, in California, that was gay marriage thing, everybody was resisting it. And the lawyer who was actually talking to the witness for the prosecution, for the plaintiff, was challenging him and saying, why do you resist this marriage of people of the same sex? And he said, because I believe in better harmony and better community and better life. And he walks into the argument taking that premise that I want a better community, better, all of that. And he makes him say that having gay marriage will make the community better. I don't know if any of you saw that. And this is how, and I'm not saying I believe in gay marriage or not believe in gay, that's not the point I'm making. I'm making a point that once a person states their position, you need to pivot around that without defying that and finding an argument. It takes a lot of skill to do that. But that's the skill that allows you to influence no matter whom you influence. It's a long question, long answer, but that's the answer I give to my clients.
Now let's talk about, for folks who are past 40, right? How do they, stay relevant and be marketable? I think it's, right now there's millennials who are creating phenomenal success. There was even a movie, I think, where Robert De Niro interns for a millennial.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Right? Yeah. So what advice would you give, folks who are?
Yeah, I really believe that a lot of this age thing has to do with your own beliefs and your own mindset. Recently, I'm 75 plus, right? And I want to continue to work until I can no longer work. I never set myself the limit that say at this age I'm going to retire. A very senior person came to me about 6 months ago, and he was then 73, probably 74 now. And he was a fairly senior guy at HP Labs. He was a senior fellow, which is a pretty big position to be. And when HP Labs closed down, he came to me and he said, Dilip, I'm embarrassed to come here, because first of all, I'm 73 and I'm looking for a job. I don't even know how to do that. So I said, if you can get out of your head that you are 73, I can help you get a job. And he said, how do I do that? I said, let's figure out how to articulate what value you bring. And let's figure out who will pay for that value. So it took us about a week to figure out how to position this person. And there was no job for him because that lab is fairly elite lab. He also came from Xerox PARC and so forth, very senior position. And there are not that many entities within the valley that do that. So we decided to identify somebody who should have a lab like that. So we found an entity that is a consortium of all the telecommunication companies that did not have a presence in the valley to have a research facility like that. So we wrote to the CEO of that entity and said, you're missing a big opportunity by not having a lab in the valley. And if you want to have a lab, we have a right person just to head that lab. And he ended up getting that job. So the point I want to make is, age is, people say that and it's a cliche, age is only in your head. But what should be in your head first and foremost, is the value that you bring. And you should be very clear about what that is. And a lot of people are not clear about what value they bring. And then they use age as an excuse, or gender as an excuse, or some ethnic aspect of their existence as an excuse. And all of those could be valid, but to me, a good value proposition always trumps any and all of those. Because what you're really selling is the value you bring. You're not selling your gender, you're not selling your age, you're not selling anything else. You're selling the value you bring. And I've done that with 73-year-olds. I've done that with 18-year-olds. So I don't think it matters. At least that's my belief. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it did. Now, dealing with negativity, pessimism, or if you have a boss or peers who are too critical, how do you deal with that?
That's a tough one, and in fact, I wrote a blog yesterday. You may want to read that. And the topic of the blog is how to scale your leadership. We want to stop this at 11:40, right? Is that what you said?
No, it's 12:10 now.
5 minutes
and then we do Q&A, right?
Yeah, 12:15 is open for.
So in 5 minutes we open it up. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
So maybe we can answer this and maybe one more question. So the blog I wrote about was how to scale your leadership. And the problem that we have, it's a worldwide problem. And it's a problem that has persisted ever since management came into being. Surveys over the last 60 years, and I've tracked them by Gallup, have consistently shown that 80% of the people surveyed, and they usually survey between 50 and 75,000 people across the world, so these are big longitudinal surveys, that 80% of the people are disengaged in their work. Either they don't care or they're completely disengaged. In other words, the degree of disengagement varies, but only 20% of the people who actually work are engaged in their work and enjoy what they do. They do it for the life of it. They don't do it for the paycheck. The remainder 80% do it for the paycheck. And that includes everybody up to the CEO, if that makes sense to you. And as a result of that, 80% of the managers that you will have will be either incompetent, dysfunctional, or indifferent. 80%. Or all three. That's true. Or all three. And I see the evidence of that because the clients who come to me with that problem. I have a really bad boss. I have a toxic boss. I have a boss that does abuse, all of that stuff. And then they say, I want to go find another job. And I tell them my immediate answer is, the chances that you will find a worse job, worse boss, after you leave this boss, odds are 4-1 against you. In other words, you will find a worse boss if you run away from this boss, right? So what I have coached with all my clients who come with this complaint is to learn how to deal with a boss that's toxic. And if you develop that immunity of dealing with a boss that's toxic, you can go anywhere and deal with any boss because 80% of the bosses are dysfunctional, just as I said, right? So then once you immunize yourself against this, so what I have done with my clients when they come to me with this problem, I first ask them, tell me exactly what is with the boss that you can't deal with. And then they tell me that he's a micromanager, or that he abuses me, or he expects me to work 7 days a week. Or one guy had a boss that says, if I sent you an email at 11 o'clock at night, I expect you to respond in 10 minutes. This is true. I'm not making this up. So how do you deal with it? So I take one case at a time and take a specific example of the boss and show the client what to do to deal with that problem. And that's one of the hardest things to do. That's one of the hardest things to do. It's called crucial conversations, how to have those conversations. And I actually write a script with them, how to have the conversation. And just to give you an example, I had a client who, I won't name the company, but whose CEO, it's a very big company, shortchanged him, didn't give him the stock that they promised and so forth. And he came to me, he said, look, I was expecting this RSUs, didn't get it. The CEO said, we expected you to perform better. And yet he had promised me this 2 years ago, and what can I do? And I said, well, we're going to have a conversation with the CEO. So we created a script, actually, based on that example, and we recorded it. And he called me 2 days later and he said, I got what I wanted. I said, how did you do that? He said, I listened to the script 8 times before I went in, because we had recorded that. And I knew exactly how to finesse him. And he was able to finesse him and get what was coming to him that he would have gotten. But he could have just sat down and said, I'm not going to. He was 3 levels below the CEO. If you don't have the guts to do that, he would have just lost a lot of money. But the point I want to make is, we can all do this if we know the point I made about half hour earlier, how to reframe the issue, how to understand where they're coming from, and how to pivot your argument so their premise doesn't get violated. That requires a skill. And it's not a skill that's, hard to get. You just need to understand human psychology and understand how good communication can be structured logically to make your case without getting upset, without getting emotional. And it's very doable. In other words, it's doable in verbal conversations, it's doable in writing, it's doable in any communication. That's a skill, that's one of the most fundamental skills you need to learn how to develop. Good writing, good communication, good speaking, and logically holding an argument that is irrefutable. And it's not that hard. It's not that hard. We just assume that we're talking to a level high enough, they will throw me out, or I don't think I can make the argument, or you will defeat yourself even before you go in. But it's something that you need to learn how to do. And I don't know if that answers your question. But let me complete that by saying that 80% of the bosses are not necessarily toxic, but in some way offensive, objectionable, dysfunctional, whatever you want to call it that. And if you take a defeat and if you decide to walk away from it, you are shortchanging yourself. So you need to learn how to deal with these bosses. And sometimes, I'm not saying it works every time, but what I'm saying works every time is your ability to immunize yourself against a toxic boss, because you will encounter them throughout your career.
We'll take, I think we're getting ready to do to open up the floor
Q&A?
for some questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll start, from the ladies' side, and then we'll go back and forth, probably 3 or 4 questions. Final question, Dilip. You've been a very successful, life and career coach. So who should be thinking of, receiving, coaching, and, who's this for, and any, any advice on, what to keep in mind, etc.
Here's the thing, right? I mean, I'm not promoting coaching, but I'm saying find somebody who can guide you objectively and who can look at your welfare in a way that works for you. It doesn't have to be a career coach. It could be your rabbi, your pastor, or whoever that you believe that you trust. The thing that I find fundamentally in my business is what I call unconscious incompetence. People don't know what they don't know, right? So in my first interaction with clients, I moved them from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. So at the end of the first session or first few sessions, they know what they don't know. And once they are aware of it, then move to conscious competence. That means they have to work at it to consciously accomplish things with a new paradigm. And the fourth state would be unconscious competence. That means you just do it automatically. And ultimately, my objective is to move clients from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. Just like swimming or riding a bicycle, right? You don't know how you can't read a book on riding a bicycle and learn how to ride it. You just can't do it. But if you know that you want to ride a bicycle, you struggle with it, consciously competent, or driving, right? I mean, initially when you learn to drive, you can't even talk to somebody. You just get on the road and holding the steering tight and can't even listen to music. But that's called conscious incompetence. Then you go to conscious competence, where you struggle and develop your judgment in driving. And unconscious competence, you can shave, you can put your lipstick on, and you really, you shouldn't be doing that. But that's what unconscious competence is. And so the point I want to make is that most of us are in a state of unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. And so people call me, I'll give an example of this. People call me and say, Dilip, I don't know what you do, but I've heard things that, you help people and so forth. So can you tell me how you're going to help me? I said, well, I can help you with the resume, I can help you with your packaging, I can help you with the interviews, I can help you with closing the interviews, getting the offer, negotiating the offer. And then they start saying, I already have a resume. Then I can help you with the interviews. I already have 3 interviews lined up. Then I say, I can help you how to close. I think I'm going to close my next interview. Then I say, then why are you calling me? Right? I mean, if everything's lined up. So what happens with a lot of people is they confuse form with function. The form is they have a resume, but they don't know what resume works or what kind of a resume would really tell a story. That's something that people get excited about. People don't even think of a storytelling resume. They don't know how that works. Or like this guy just wrote me a recommendation on LinkedIn about interviews. He was going to the interviews and he was not clearing them. He was a fresh graduate, just graduated last year from Santa Clara. And in one session, I said, let's do an interview. And he quickly realized that he was all focused on who he was and what he did and the courses he took and all that he does. But what was missing in his message was, how is that going to help the business that was interviewing him? He completely missed that. So I said, if we can repackage your message to show how that will help the business, then you will clear the interview and get the job offer. We did one practice interview, and the first interview after that, he got the job offer. It's that easy. But he didn't know that he didn't know what he didn't know. You see what I'm saying? He was unconsciously incompetent. He was answering all the questions, but he was not answering the answers that the interviewer wanted to hear. That's what I call unconscious incompetence. So the point I want to make is, we are all unconsciously incompetent. The question is, the only way we know is when we see this consciousness presented to us and say, gosh, I really didn't know that. And that's who benefits. And there are people who are unconsciously incompetent all their life, and they stay that way, and they go to their grave that way. And that's how it is, and they're okay with that. But what I'm saying is, just be critical of what you don't know and be openly inquisitive about what it is that you could know. That will change your life. I don't know if that answers.
That was powerful. So we'll open it up for some questions and just some housekeeping. It's questions only, so a quick question, no making comments or because we don't have the time for that. And Dilip, would you have a few minutes at the end just to, if a few people want to shake your hand and say hello to you, etc.? Okay.
I will sign an autograph if you want.
Okay. So he will be available for a short time after that. So we'll take some questions. I say we'll start, with one from the ladies. You can, if you're comfortable, stand up, say your name, and then ask your question. We'll do that on the men's side as well. So any questions from the ladies' side, or should I move on to the men?
I can ask a question. Hi, I'm Lubna. Most people know me here. So I basically, I'm a part of the HR team with my current company. So it's already a part of my question you've answered about an incompetent boss. But my next question to you would be is, you have this boss who's like absolutely threatened, right?
Yeah.
And then your super boss is immune. In this kind of a situation, what options is one person left with? And it's a pattern I've seen in most of my career.
Correct.
It happens all the time. So where do I keep running?
Yeah, so let me understand your question. Please sit down.
Okay.
Your boss is dysfunctional or incompetent.
Correct.
And his boss is?
Is immune. Is aware but immune.
Oh, I see. So he's basically ignoring this whole
Correct.
scenario.
Correct.
Okay. So, that's not that atypical. I see that a lot. Especially if your skip boss has hired this guy, then they are going to protect them at all costs, right? So let me tell you the story of this person I told you about, where this client was, his boss is telling him, even if I send an email at 11, I expect you to respond in 15 minutes. And this just was not one episode, this happened a lot of times. So the other thing that happened with this client, and it's a longer story, but he was working at Visa at that time, and this manager said, forget that job, I'll pay you much more money, I'll promote you within 3 months to the next level, and this is a great job. And so he quits his new job at Visa and joins this team. And within 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, he tells him, I think I made a mistake hiring you. True story. And the same guy now, he did this to him, that I call you at 11, you should respond, I call you at midnight, and so forth. So what we decided to do in this particular case, we decided to escalate that to not just the skip boss, because skip boss had him, 2 skip levels to the VP, and said, this is what has happened to me, and I would like to investigate, and if you want, I can lodge a complaint with HR. because this guy was going through hell after he quit his job at Visa and came here and so forth. But in any case, with this particular case, I want to cut this story short. It took a year for HR to investigate. He had done this to other people. They found that all out, and he got fired after a year. This boss. So you'll have to, I'm not saying this will work for you,
Correct.
but you will have to find the best avenue to make your case. And to me, the reward is not that the guy got fired.
Mm-hmm.
The reward to this guy, my client, was, I can do this. You see the difference?
Right.
It's not the punitive reward that I got the boss fired.
Right.
It's the confidence he developed that I know how to do this and I can do this anytime in my life. That's the real reward. And you can do this. It's happening with another client of mine yesterday, and this is how I earn my living. So I could tell here and talk all day about all these dysfunctions and things. But you need to learn how to take charge and use some of the things I told you before. How to pivot, how to influence, how to communicate, how to hold their beliefs, and yet make sure that they understand your argument and see the fallacy of their belief without challenging the belief. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We all can do that. It just requires a certain presence of mind and certain confidence and certain ability that I can do this. And we all can do this. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Okay. We'll take a question from the men's side.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Muthabir. I have a question about something that you talk about, age.
Age.
Right? So, as a young person in the company, I was working in a company where average age was like 45,
Mhm.
right? And when, as a young person, you propose an idea, people think about your experience and your age first.
Right.
They don't even consider thinking about your idea
Correct.
or evaluating it,
Yeah.
how valuable it is.
Yeah.
How do you think we should propose the idea to people
Yeah.
so that they will evaluate your idea
Yeah.
first and then think about your age and experience?
That's a very good question. So, did everybody hear the question? Okay, otherwise I can repeat it. Here is the thing that I think was one of the first questions. How do you build your network? How do you build your ecosystem? So please sit down. So, and thanks for asking this question, because this is a very seminal question to any career growth. So what you have to learn to do as a young and inexperienced and discounted member of the team, you need to find people within your ecosystem with whom you connect well. There'll always be senior people who like you, who trust you, or who find you to be, exceptionally whatever that they see is important to them. And learn how to ferret out these people within your ecosystem, immediate ecosystem, and first present the idea that you have to them to see if they can vet it for you and say that, do you see a merit in this idea? Try this with 2 or 3 different people and poll it to make sure that your idea is worth merit, right? And then if somebody shows interest in it, use their help to see how they can champion the idea without hijacking it. That's the other danger you have in companies. Champion your idea and promote you to get it to the level where it will have some impact. It requires, it's not a linear path, it requires some capital building with relationships and everything else. It requires longer time. But from a system standpoint, I think this is the shortest path to success. Because exactly what he said, as an inexperienced, discounted member of the team, nobody will even give you time, and if they give you time, they will say, yeah, 1 minute to tell me what you have to tell me. And you can barely get started in 1 minute because you don't have that kind of a presentation experience. So try to develop this support ecosystem, have somebody to champion it, and make sure that champion doesn't hijack the idea and present it as his or hers. And then get yourself made visible. And I have done that with my clients. So I don't know if that'll work for you or not. But it's something, it's a skill that's worth developing over the years. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
Jan. Great nuggets of advice, Dilip. I can personally vouch for being a former client of Dilip. My question is about mid-level managers in mid-sized and large-sized companies in the Valley. How to break into the barrier to the senior management. There's a lot of politics involved in things.
Right.
What recommendations do you have?
Right. Yeah, before I answer that, anytime somebody says, I was your client, I said, do you want your money back? The best way to establish your intent to get promoted is to have that clarity and to start seeing what avenues you have open to get some visibility. For example, let's say that you talk to your boss and during the annual performance review, the boss says, I want you to do this, these are your 4 objectives for the next year. And very few people have the presence of mind to ask, what are your objectives? You're talking to your boss now. What are your objectives? And how will you be measured by your boss? Nobody has the presence of mind to ask that question. They're too busy figuring out how I'm going to meet my 4 objectives. And when you can open that door for your boss, you're basically having a dialogue of how to move your boss up by doing something that you would do to help him or her to move up. And so the fact that you are having this conversation in this way, in this vein, on this forum, or in this forum, about around APR, kind of opens a door for the boss to see that you could help him succeed. And you could ask him in that conversation, what are some of the initiatives that you want to do that will make you look good? You can use the language that suits you between you and your boss. And the boss will say, for example, if you're a software developer or infrastructure person, he will say, for the past 3 years, I've been trying to establish a much more easy to develop infrastructure so people can spend more time doing the software development work than chasing bugs and managing the infrastructure and managing the crashes and everything else, because we spend half our time just dealing with the infrastructure and the remaining time debugging and developing software. So if you can help us make that infrastructure better, because we actually did this is an actual story. And so this person who wanted the promotion took on the initiative to systematically upgrade the infrastructure over the next, I think it took him 2 years to do that. He took it as a special project, he got his boss's support, he got some capital approved, and over 2 years he was able to completely change the infrastructure from the standard waterfall methodology to DevOps and CDCI kind of an infrastructure where they were releasing software almost continuously. And at the end of those 2 years, his boss suddenly became a hero because they never thought they could do it this quickly. And this boss moved up and he pulled him up as a result of that. You see how this can work? So don't just focus on your APR and your performance review. Your boss has the same anxieties you do, except that unless you ask the question, it doesn't come out. So you need to, and the other way to do that, you don't even have to ask. You can go and say that, look, everybody, all of our 20 developers are struggling with the infrastructure problem. Always have a lot of lapses, bugs, this, that. I would like to take this initiative, form a team, and do this on my own time and show you how we can do it. And once the boss sees the benefit, he will or she will go out of the way to help you achieve that with resources, with support, with championing and whatever it is. So always look for these opportunities, present 2 or 3 proposals. That's how you get a promotion. You don't get a promotion because you made all the objectives at the end of the year. Trust me, everybody, that's called a hygiene factor. That's called a ticket to the dance, But you need to now go and do the dance. That's the hard part for most people. So if you do that, and that's what I tell my clients to do, identify the opportunities that are not clear to all your colleagues, and then you stand out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
All right, I think we have time for one more question, so.
okay. Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
yeah,
I've got a question. See, like when you get a ad for a job, right? You see, like first of all, you evaluate yourself, and okay, you beat 70-80% of that requirement, as well as you don't want to waste your time
Yeah.
and the hiring manager's time,
Yeah.
right? Right. Now there are certain things like which theoretically you have a bookish knowledge and everything,
Yeah.
and you're confident that you can do it,
yeah,
right? But when you go for an interview, the person at the other end, he says, okay, you don't have the hands-on experience.
oh, I see.
How do you convince that? How do you communicate and make them understand your point of view, and just you get hired there?
Okay, so the point you're making is you don't have the hands-on experience that is required in the job.
Yeah, but you have the theoretical, bookish knowledge, everything.
Okay, so here's the point.
You're confident.
No, you're right, that's a good question, have a seat. Okay, so that's the argument you cannot win if you're in front of somebody. If you're in front of somebody and they say you haven't coded in C++ or Java or Python or whatever it is, then you can't say, oh, I've learned it, I can do it, because 10,000 other people will say, I have also learned it, I have taken courses, I have certified in Python. Long time ago, in fact, it's in my first book, there is a section in a chapter I wrote. And the title of that chapter is, if you want to beat Tiger Woods, don't play golf with him. Right? And the point I made was, invite Tiger Woods to play ping pong. And if you play slightly better ping pong, you can beat him. And then you can say, I beat Tiger Woods. But you don't have to say you beat him in ping pong. You see what I'm saying? So what you want to find in that discussion with the boss, who is insistent on Python or whatever certification and hands-on, you can say, I know Python, but your problem is not coding in Python. Your problem is how to take your current development infrastructure from waterfall to CDCI. And I know how to do that. So if you want to hire a great Python coder, I'm not your guy. But if you want to do a CDCI releases, and if you want to do 1 week sprints, I can show you how to do that in the first year that I'm on your team. Now it completely changes the conversation. But you need to know what their need is. You need to know what their need is. And you need to go fully expecting, and actually, I'm trying to see, I wrote a blog recently, it's about 6 months old now. There was, and this is an actual story, there was a opening for a program manager in an EDI company, electronic design, EDA, electronic design automation, one of the big companies here. And this client had no experience in EDA. And EDA is such an insular field, as probably some of you know, that they only hire people who understand EDA, electronic design automation. How to design chips, how to test, how to physical design, all that stuff. He had none of them. But he was a terrific program manager. He came from Cisco, right? And he applied and they said, we want to interview you, but you certainly don't have any experience in EDA industry. We don't even know how this is going to work. And they lined him up for 9 interviews, including VPs and senior architects, really very technical interviews. So what we decided to do was, he was knowing that he was not going to win the EDA question battle, we immediately disclosed in each interview that if you want to hire an EDA expert, I'm not your guy. But if you want to take something from the initial stages of program formulation to actual release, defect-free, that's what I do. And I've done that for 15 years, right? So when he said that, when he acknowledged his weakness on the first 2 minutes, the entire interview shifted from discussions on how electrons move in an EDA software to how program management works, if you understand how program works, right? And they actually hired him. And he had internal guys from that company who were EDA experts that were rejected. That's the point, that's the golf trick, that's the, that's what I said, if you want to play golf with Tiger Woods, if you want to beat Tiger Woods, don't play golf with him. He was not playing the EDA game. He was playing the program management game. So decide what your game is and show them how that game brings value to them. by making this argument. And this is not an experiment, I have actually done this. I've done this for myself 5 times. I got into careers where I had never done this before, right? And I made the expertise, like in biotech, for example, irrelevant. I said, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to show you how to get things out. Okay, I don't know if that helps you or not. Okay, are we done?
Yeah, that was a riveting 1 hour with Coach Dilip Saraf. If they need to reach you, it's dilipsaraf.com. Right?
Yeah, Dilip at dilipsaraf.com. I have a fairly complete profile on LinkedIn. I have website dilipsaraf.com. And what else can I say? But I have blogs every week that are all about careers. So maybe you want to visit and see if any of those work for you.
Yeah, once again, thank you very much, and I hope Shine Labs brings you back in the future for
Of
a
course,
seminar or
anytime.
something.